Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, envecon. Thank you. My name is Ian Dickie. I'm a director of FTech, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. So just a few bits of housekeeping. Firstly, if there is a fire alarm, you can exit back past reception and the exit there to my right. Tea and coffee and lunch will be served back in the rooms where it was earlier. And if you haven't found them, there's a toilet and cloakroom downstairs past the welcome desk. We're pleased as always for UCNI to bring together our diverse community from across the public sector, private sector, NGOs, business, and there are also non-economists here, and they're particularly welcome because they want to use economics. There's increasing attendance from that group and applying it in their everyday work. We've got a fantastically diverse agenda across energy, jobs, manufacturing, nature-based solutions, climate change and the social cost of carbon, agriculture, forestry, chemicals, air pollution, mental health, and of course the beautiful Scotland's environment. It's an incredibly diverse set of issues, and each year it reaffirms my choice of career being a good one. It's my pleasure to be able to welcome today's keynote speaker, Kerry. She's an independent consultant, and if you read her bio, in our brochure, you can see what an amazing range of organizations she is and has been involved in. A non-executive board member of Finance Earth. She's currently chairing the Nature Investment Standards Group advisory group for the British Standards Institute. She's a trustee of the Royal Society for Protection of Birds and a conservation fellow at the Zoological Society of London and a member of IUCN's Commission on Ecosystem Management. She's been on the board of Natural England, a member of the Natural Capital Committee, and formerly a barrister. She was on the Secretariat of the UN Conference on Environment and Development, the Earth Summit in 1992. And also one of her notable achievements, and where I first worked with Kerry, was founding and directing the Business and Biodiversity Offsets Program of Forest Trends, in which 100 organizations worked for over 15 years on Biodiversity Net Gain, which England has just started to adopt. So listen carefully, envecon. She has a track record of being ahead of her time. Kerry.
Morning, everybody. That was a very kind introduction, Ian, and thanks for the invitation to be here. And I think you have picked a good career, for sure. I love the breadth of today's agenda. What a diverse set of issues. Is there a common thread running through them? I think it's a double braid of place and incentive. Someone's making the space for operations in, as Ian just said, energy, agriculture, forestry, fisheries, transport, chemicals, and health. And that's because they're compelled to do so, they're paid, or they're doing it for free. I'm going to talk about land use planning, getting the right economic and environmental outcomes in the right places with incentives for people to effect change. I'll focus on nature-based solutions within the full package of integrated planning for all sectors. I'll speak of land use planning, but of course, the same pressing issues arise for marine spatial planning. My work has largely been overseas in Latin America, Africa, Australasia, and Europe, but I switched to the UK some years ago to reduce carbon emissions, so most of the examples today are from here. But despite dramatic differences, I've learned that from Mongolia to Mozambique to Manchester, from Papua New Guinea to Peru to Preston, the core challenges are the same. The solutions that we reach for are a variation on a theme, so I hope this largely English narrative about land, sea, and incentives feels relevant to you. I've been lucky to work alongside some very distinguished economists, some of whom are here today. We've collaborated in brand new fields at their inception, when the work is really an act of the imagination. I've been involved in designing fair bioprospecting deals and legal frameworks for access to genetic resources, benefit sharing, and nature-based intellectual property rights, integrating environmental social governance issues into the daily investment decisions of mainstream asset managers, assessing the natural capital at the national level and reflecting it in organizations' balance sheets and their profit and loss statements, and directing development away from precious places and delivering a net gain of biodiversity. Economists were at the heart of all of these, sharing ideas, offering models and evidence as the rationale for new policy, making the business case to companies and investors, and bringing stakeholders together to recruit them to delivery. It's glorious fun to innovate solutions in new fields when the territory is uncharted and everything is possible. Seeing things through to clear government policy and corporate practice is another matter entirely and takes determination. Colleagues and I first advised DEFRA on the shape of a national system for biodiversity net gain in 2008. Most of this became legally binding last year, 16 years later, and the system's still bedding in. You might say that's the natural policy cycle or a typical time frame for the spread of best practice in industry. The problem is, of course, that we're in a climate and biodiversity emergency. We're perilously close to some tipping points. In some cases, we've crossed them. So we need to speed up the delivery of solutions. My talk is an appeal to your community for urgency, for practical application of your work, and scaling up solutions. And I'd love to get your help with some of the challenges I'm confronting. Launching the consultation on a land use framework for England in January, our Secretary of State for the Environment said, "We must make the best use of the land around us so we can grow the food to feed the nation, build 1.5 million new homes to address the housing crisis, construct the energy infrastructure to secure homegrown clean power, and underpinning all these ambitions, protect and restore nature here in one of the most nature-depleted countries on earth." In other words, rather than pitting the environment against development, we must achieve many objectives simultaneously. And to do this, we need spatially explicit planning, terrestrial and marine. Right here, the Royal Society published a terrific report on multifunctional landscapes in 2023. Our pale green dot of a planet seems vast as you travel over it, but trade-offs and competing demands for land and sea challenge us. It's relatively easy to write ambitious policies in separate sectoral silos, but can we reconcile them, bring them together in place, and do it quickly? Let's imagine a happy ending to the Secretary of State's vision and then look at some of the challenges getting there. Can you help solve them? Picture a region. Let's say it's a decent chunk of England, more than a landscape, perhaps a county. The people who live there, business people, investors, farmers, and their representatives in local government, face difficult choices. They're anticipating major electricity and offshore wind developments to achieve net zero and more housing, so they'll need more transport, doctors, and schools. Many have experienced flooding in the recent years, and some have health problems from air pollution. The community backed the government's commitment to protect 30% of land and sea effectively by 2030, but where and how? The farmers are grappling with an array of options for agri-environment schemes and the nebulous possibility of selling credits into environmental markets. But everyone is struggling to bring the whole picture together, agree trade-offs, and reconcile development with resilient ecosystems. These people turn to you and they say, "Can you help us? We don't know where and how to fit in everything in the space available. We're not sure it's actually possible. It looks to us like some policies are inconsistent and undermine each other. We're not sure the environmental outcomes pay enough for people to be willing to make the land use change. Many of us are small operators without the money or expertise to engage in environmental markets. And anyway, our children and grandchildren say much of this is greenwash and wouldn't make them proud, so we're a bit stuck." You say, "Don't worry, good news, I'm an economist, I can help." Suddenly, it's 2 years later, 8:25 in the morning. You're glowing after your interview with Amal Rajan on the BBC's Today programme. He's just said, what an inspiring success story. All the new houses and trees in the right places, farms and ocean producing food, as well as climate and nature benefits. Fantastic. The 1 million residents in your region are right behind you. New jobs and physical and mental health benefits speak for themselves. This is all over social media with cool quotes from the Prime Minister and Sir David Attenborough on his 100th birthday. You're a hero. A friend congratulates you. "How did you do it?" she asks. "Must be because you're an applied economist." You smile modestly. She says, "No, really, how did you do it? I face the same challenges, and here are my 6 questions. How did you arrive at the spatial planning for all the different activities and navigate trade-offs? How did you aggregate environmental credits across lots of land ownings, keeping the transaction costs down, and still deliver a return on investment around 12%? When can you derive multiple benefits from nature on the same piece of land, get additional results for the different payments, and generate sufficient income to persuade landowners to commit to long-term delivery? How did you ensure the local community benefited fairly so they were champions for the land use change? Which standards and assurance mechanisms do you recommend to satisfy everyone of the quality of the outcome and the high integrity of environmental markets? And how did you get the different government departments and agencies working seamlessly together? You say airily, oh, it was easy. How long have you got? But sadly, I'm not you, and don't pretend to have the answers. We just have a few minutes. There's stark evidence in the 7th Carbon Budget Report. The Office for Environmental Protection reminded us recently that government is well off track to meet its environmental targets and commitments, and the window to change the trajectory is closing fast. The State of Natural Capital Report, the State of Nature Report, and several other recent harbingers are profoundly concerning. And of course, a lot of things right now are very scary. But in many ways, we're tantalizingly close to being able to achieve the vision that I described. Laws and policies and approaches and expertise in the private sector have transformed in the last 2 decades. Here's what I find promising. On demand, we now have mandatory requirements for BNG and nutrient neutrality in England, driving environmental recovery, catalysing sustainable house building, and giving developers clarity and certainty on what's needed. On the voluntary side, a host of international initiatives encourage companies and their investors to assess and report their impacts and dependencies on nature, then to address them. On finance, many nature funds have been announced over the last 3 years by Aberdeen, Aviva, AXA, Generation, Gresham House, Morova, and Octopus, just for example. Some others mainly focus more broadly or internationally. Some, like the planned UK Nature Fund in which Finance Earth is involved, will not acquire land, but rather work with existing landowners. Recent deals by Nattergal with Aviva and Lansdowne Partners and Triodos Bank supporting a number of projects suggest there's significant interest from private investment. Indeed, last year, UNEP FI reported that private finance for nature had surged from $102 billion in circulation, up 11-fold from 2020. We're only likely to garner a handful of billions for UK nature from the hearty £2 trillion invested in UK insurance and pension funds. But it's a good start at filling the UK nature finance gap. Some local government pension scheme defined benefit pools already invest in UK nature. Long-term asset funds, LTAFs, are a new kind of defined contribution fund, and they're growing fast. They offer clients some exposure to higher return private markets and could allocate perhaps 5% to relatively illiquid assets, including natural capital. If some LTAF funds are allocated to nature in the UK, and that's still a big if for reasons I'll come to, it will really move us in the right direction. On supply, the natural capital sector is gearing up to supply high-quality nature-based solutions for public and private funding. Programs like the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, NERF, and its Scottish counterpart are helping landowners get their nature investment pipeline onto a proper commercial footing. The UK Nature Impact Fund Accelerator builds capacity to unlock finance and move projects to the investable stage, perhaps after a NEF grant, helping with investment cases, financial modelling, and contract structures. About 70% of UK land is agricultural, comprising some 209,000 farm holdings. The average size is 82 hectares, and almost half are actually under 20 hectares. We'll need to crack the challenge of aggregating a pipeline of investable projects, working with many landowners. We must maintain integrity while keeping things as simple and cost-effective as possible. Experiences with aggregation are growing in number and in scale. They often build on farmer clusters and super clusters, cooperatives, catchment-based and coastal partnerships, regional coalitions, and environmental trust funds. Where central government used to decide payment levels, these are often determined now by market-based approaches, with local players finding solutions that work for their conditions. An example is the Landscape Enterprise Network programme spearheaded by 3Keel, in which Nestlé and Diageo have partnered to invest in measures that farmers in Yorkshire are taking on 700 hectares of arable land. Another model's the Wendling Beck Operating Company, owned by 4 Norfolk landowners. They incorporated to trade and enter into contracts for the sale of biodiversity units, natural capital services, and regenerative agriculture to create 800 hectares of nature to restore. They're working across intensively farmed landscapes with NGOs and the public sector. Other approaches are operating at a much greater scale through catchment trading and environment funds. On the land use framework in England, the much awaited consultation is now live, and it asks us good questions. We're told the framework will apply right across government, taking in not only nature and carbon, but agriculture, energy, infrastructure, and that's great. Some regions are already starting to work on integrated planning for themselves. 2 weeks ago, Nature North published its strategic plan to create the UK's first nature-positive regional economy. Over 50 organisations are involved in this pan-regional collaboration, and they plan to create the conditions for investment in nature, put nature at the heart of strategic planning and economic decision-making, and build a pipeline of outstanding investable nature recovery projects, among other things. On standards, nature markets will only deliver the outcome we need in the right places, and actually they'll only help companies manage risks and opportunities if they maintain high integrity. You rarely hear the words nature market uttered without the prefix high integrity. But is that for real? Fortunately, a number of initiatives are working hard to define principles, standards, and assurance mechanisms to underpin this. For instance, the British Standards Institution programme, whose strategic advisory group I'm chairing, is preparing a suite of nature investment standards, and the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits is framing good practice in their own field. So taken together, all of this adds up to encouraging progress on demand, on finance, supply, aggregation, and standards. Build the capacity to put that into practice at scale, and we're a good way closer to our vision. But following that burst of optimism, we all know we're not there yet, not by a dramatic margin. We need many players to take action, investment funds, groups of farmers, those involved in environmental markets, and so on. But the key thing to drive our vision forward next is government action. So in my remaining minutes, I'd like to suggest some recommendations to government to make the vision a reality, drawing on ideas from some true experts in the field who have generously shared them with me, and give examples of where I think you and your help would be especially welcome. Here's what we need government to do. Far and away, the single most important thing for government is to solidify demand for ecosystem services and environmental credits. So my first points concern mandatory markets. Credit systems are a powerful way for those damaging nature and climate to pay for restoration, but we've seen clearly that voluntary markets are unreliable and unable to achieve vital national policy goals. We shouldn't rely on them for that. They're unable to attract substantial private capital, and they're not going to achieve our aims, whether that's on peatland restoration or on other areas. We need mandatory compliance markets. Mandatory biodiversity net gain and nutrient mitigation are a significant and welcome step forward. Nascent markets need consistency and clarity from policymakers, so government should bolster, not undermine them. It should introduce BNG for nationally significant infrastructure projects in November, as promised, and require marine net gain. Larger companies should be obliged to report, then address impacts and dependencies on nature through their value chains. We're some way from this at the moment, but it would significantly reduce impacts internationally and attract private investment into global restoration, and it would make for stronger companies. I've focused mostly on nature so far, but we also need to move carbon credit systems onto a mandatory footing. We'll learn in May whether DEFRA decides to include the Woodland Carbon Code in the UK ETS, which would be very welcome. Once some remaining issues are resolved, we should include peatland too. The ETS is driving down emissions, but signals to companies as to what is expected of them remain unclear. There's a good case for government to spell out clearer obligations, for instance, by requiring companies to publish transition plans, as Labour set out in its manifesto. The current lack of consistency means there are no confirmed revenues for investors, and voluntary carbon markets is sporadic at best. Companies need to invest in removals projects for the roughly 10% of emissions that they can't eliminate to neutralise their emissions by 2050. And project finance is well suited to this. Carbon credits keep finance off balance sheet and offer a way to share responsibility with others whose value chains are associated with the same land. Government could underpin the investment case as a buyer of last resort, rather like the Woodland Carbon Guarantee. If Treasury balks at revenue support with its long-term public liabilities, some other vehicles, such as a capital fund, could be more appetising, and it could then be used for all sorts of ecosystem services. Government could set up a purchase facility for pending issuance units, a kind of carbon credit IOU used by the Woodland Code, hold them for some years until they're verified, and then get a decent return on selling them. This would strengthen the market in the early years while the trees are growing and not generating credits. Looking more broadly to other ecosystem services such as natural flood prevention, government should consider how to ensure those whose private interests benefit pay for the public goods they're using. My next point is about helping suppliers access finance for nature at scale. Reportedly, Elm's landscape recovery projects are struggling to attract private finance. The fundamental challenge is a truly investable business model based on realistic assumptions and rates of return. But having crossed that hurdle, landowners must take a leap of faith, give up reliable, lower-tier agri-environment payments for a punt on a market-based approach, hoping they'll find buyers and crossing their fingers the environmental credits generate something that will come good in the following years. Government could come up with a loan-to-equity offer or some other financial bridging mechanism. Budgets are tight. This could be more about targeting Elm's money better to demonstrate the viability of new kinds of projects than asking for more. The Chancellor plans to merge local government pension schemes to drive economic growth. With LGPS schemes consolidated, larger funds could invest more in private market vehicles required for nature finance. To put investment to UK nature, pension funds need a helping hand with research to gather the information needed to persuade their investment committee colleagues. A collaboration between LGPS, LTAFs and DEFRA for collective due diligence on potential investments could offer better information on UK nature projects than investment consultants are currently able to provide their clients. Information on the costs of different projects, biodiversity, carbon, nutrients, flood alleviation, what percentage of the costs are likely to be recoverable through grants, and perhaps an annual investability report could be influential. The thing is, given the lack of a track record in nature markets, we badly need demonstration projects to build investor confidence. I think there are gaps in the suite of standards being prepared to support environmental markets. In-setting is growing in importance as companies deliver nature and climate programs through their partners in the value chain. But this isn't covered by market standards and may not generate quality outcomes in the right places. Also, our family of nature standards is currently imbalanced. It focuses on the supply of credits, leaving out the demand side, and I think that risks promoting a license to trash and greenwashing. So, having thought about demand, supply, and investment, we must round off by returning to land use planning to bring all the pieces together in place. A national spatial plan and single coherent framework for land use and placemaking would be a breakthrough, offering clarity and confidence in planning. All departments of government should be obliged to apply the principles in the land use framework, preferably cast in legislation, alongside a statutory duty to put local nature recovery strategies into action. Spatial targeting should be introduced to agri-environment and other incentives, focused not just on achieving single outcomes, but targeting the whole broad set of values, including nature, food production, and energy security. It's time to connect local plans with national strategies for devolved planning to achieve its share of national targets. Making local nature recovery strategies a material consideration in the planning process, preferably as part of unitary authorities' strategic development plans, would strengthen them. Perhaps they could even become a vehicle for aggregation, a basis to identify flood mitigation funding, for instance, and support the development of private finance at scale. One day, following devolution, the county in our vision could have power and responsibility to deliver the full suite of economic and environmental targets within its spatial plan, matched with a blended finance pot, drawing on local government's pension schemes. The Planning and Infrastructure Bill published on Tuesday this week aims to speed up and streamline the delivery of new homes and critical infrastructure. Its proposals for a nature restoration fund signal a shift towards strategic mitigation and away from site-based approaches. This could deliver outcomes for nature that address cumulative as well as direct losses, are bigger and better connected, are in strategic locations, and offer economies of scale. Government says this will only happen when strategic solutions more than address relevant environmental impacts, recognising there may be times when this won't be feasible or only once better evidence is available. Extremely careful drafting will be needed to reassure us that the mitigation hierarchy will be followed and irreplaceable losses not allowed. So, if those are some steps for government, what about you? I hope you agree there are plenty of areas where economists can help. Here are 3 ideas. The priority is fortifying the business case for private investors and landowners and giving courage to government to strengthen its policy and investment. Can you provide evidence of returns on investment for a variety of nature and climate projects? Some authoritative and publicly available discounted cash flow models would support the due diligence that I mentioned for those investment committees. Maybe a set each for woodland carbon code, peatland, timber, forestry, BNG, and nutrient climate projects. We need land management tools to support decisions for spatial prioritization of multifunctional land use. Can you design those tools? Can you help landowners apply them? They could use them to assess options based on what their land's best suited for across several economic sectors and ecosystem services, with models for income linked to market price and available incentives. Above all, whatever your field of work, please ask yourself regularly, as I'm sure you do, how can my work improve the quality of decision-making, problem-solving, and implementation as soon as possible? I hope that question will haunt you in a nice way throughout the day, and I'm looking forward to learning from each session. I'm grateful to Craig Mackenzie, Rich Speak, Archie Struthers, Etche Ozdemirolio, Ian Dickie, Helen Edmondson, Rachel Fisher, Max Heaver, Georgie Barber, James Marsden, and Merrick Denton Thompson for their thoughts in recent conversations. And to you, thank you very much for hearing me out.
Thank you very much, Kerry, for that vision and also articulating the challenges. So we need to get straight on with addressing those. So I'm going to hand over to the session 1 chair, Paul.